Okay. Welcome everyone to the study of Grace Does That. Chapter 1, we're going to be finishing it and hopefully get to the questions. We're on page 11 in the handout. Surely the books will be here this week because they were supposed to be here last week. Isn't that the way it's supposed to go? If it doesn't get there the week it's supposed to, it's got to get there the week it's not supposed to. That's just logic, right? Okay, we were scouring Hebrews as we were trying to do a setup to the text, which is chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. On page 11, you're seeing where we're going to go back to approaching God on his throne of grace. Hebrews 4:16 begins with a therefore, and everybody knows when you see a therefore, do what? That's right. See what it's there for. See what comes before it. And there are a total of 5 therefores. I guess it depends on your translation also. In chapter 4, and it's not the first time a therefore occurs, but it shows that he is building and building and building. And so what precedes the therefore of chapter 4, verse 16? Let's read them. Chapter 4, verse 1, therefore let us fear, if while a promise remains of entering his rest, any one of you may seem to have come short of it. Verse 6, therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly had good news preached to them have failed to enter because of disobedience. Verse 11, therefore let us be diligent to enter that rest, so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience. Verse 14, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. Verse 16, and therefore let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Now, we start off with the very first one about fear. Fear was a big part of the Old Covenant. They could not approach the mountain of God, which was Sinai. If they approached it, they touched it, what would happen to them? They would die. Samson's mother and father, they saw the, quote, angel of the Lord. And they said, behold, we've seen God. And the conclusion was that we're going to die. But the wife there was a little bit more wise and said, well, if we were going to die, we'd be dead by now, but we're not. And so the Old Testament approaching God oftentimes was filled with fear. But when you look at verse 1, we're going to see something I think is kind of surprising. Therefore, since the promise to enter his rest remains, let us beware, CSB, or fear that none of you be found to have fallen short. Do we all see how fear is turned in a different direction here? In the Old Testament, the fear was getting too close to God. Here, what do they fear? That's right, not having God close to them, because the land of Canaan was the promised land. And so that is turning the fear upside down. Instead of being fearful of being in God's presence, now we're fearful of missing out on being in God's presence. That's a pretty drastic change, isn't it? And when you look at fear, I mean, it's used in many ways in the Old Testament and New Testament, positive and negative. There's a place for fear to us today, but there's also a place where we should not fear or fear the wrong thing, and that is missing out on on being with God. Fear can be rational or irrational, right or wrong, terrorizing or reverential. But here it is tied to something positive. Don't fear on missing out with God. Now, when I was writing this, I had this thought that I used with an agnostic one time, and it kind of struck him as a thought he hadn't considered before. And he said, you Christians, you're only in it so that you can go to heaven, so you don't have to go to hell. That's the only thing that you're in it for, just to get something. So you're very selfish. And so I presented him the idea that we should worship God, whether there's a heaven or hell, just because God deserves it. I mean, Jared touched on that in the singing Sunday night. And so I offered this as a concept for us to consider. We know that there are two alternatives, heaven and hell. What if God offered a third? Would we be willing to take it? The third one is annihilation. Because, you know, some people actually teach that hell is not actually enduring, it's just total annihilation. You cease to exist. So, you're really bad, you go to hell. You're really good and serve God, you go to heaven. But if you just live a decent life and just want to be left alone, God says, okay, I'll let you have that. At the end of the life, you'll just cease to exist. Do you think there are people that would choose annihilation over going to heaven just so they could live life however they want? I think a lot of people would. Yes, Gordon.
To avoid going to hell.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm not really interested in heaven. I'm not really interested in hell. I'll take annihilation. And really, that is such a disrespect to God. What you're saying is, okay, God, I'll go to heaven just so I don't have to go to hell. Now, I guarantee the majority of people, when they're baptized, hell's more on their mind than heaven. It was with me. And I've tried to encourage people to be baptized not for just an escape, but rather so that they can be closer to God, so they could please God and be in His presence. But Hebrews wants them to get out of the wilderness and get into the promised land. And what they are to fear is missing out on that. And I think that's something for us to consider. How much do we want to go to heaven to be with God versus how much do we want to go to heaven just to escape hell? Yes, sir.
That's, when you think about that annihilation, you know, people who consider that may think of themselves more lukewarm. Well, I'm not hot, I'm cold, I'm just right in the middle. But what God says about that, they ought to see it.
I'll spew you out of my mouth. That's the old King James. Yeah. But I think a lot of lukewarm people, hey, that's a choice. I'm not that bad. Our goal is we want to be with God, to draw near, to approach. And when we see in chapter 4, when we're drawing near to God, it is so that we can, as the chapter leads up to, the idea is rest. Hebrews 4 teaches there is a rest that is promised. And I'm wondering if we're supposed to see the rest as a type of Holy of Holies also. What did Jesus promise? Follow me for what reason? My yoke is light. That's right. You'll find rest for your souls. And that's a result of forgiveness. But there's another type of rest that's also here. In Hebrews chapter 4, when they received rest, it was a rest of wandering. But when they went into the promised land and they received the rest, did that mean there was going to be no problems at all? No, they had to continue to fight, didn't they? And that kind of fits our life too. Just because we receive rest does not mean that there are no battles whatsoever for us to fight. Did Jesus ever get tired? Yes. What did he do when he was tired? He prayed. What else did he do when he was tired? That's right, he went away by himself. I got to get away from these people because he was serving so much that it just drained him. So we've got to go to the throne of grace also when we are tired. Is being tired dangerous? Yeah, it is. Let me ask you this. Anybody here ever, say things that they shouldn't just because they're tired? Yeah. One of the dangers of being tired is, at least the way that I phrased it in the book is, you get to see the real me. When we're not tired, we put up the fortress, we protect ourselves, we know that I can't be the way that I really want to be, and oftentimes we protect others from ourselves, and we even protect ourselves from ourselves. But when you're tired, oftentimes your defenses are down, and you show sometimes what your base nature is. You ever heard somebody say, I'm sorry, I did not mean what I said? Now let me ask you this question. You all have probably been guilty of saying something and then say, I'm sorry, I should have said it. I didn't mean what I said. But did you mean what you said when you said it? Yes, that's true, Frank. Very much so. There's another danger of being tired, and that is quitting. And that's often what the Israelites did. When they saw the giants, what did they do? They got scared. Their fear caused them to quit. Yes, Gordon.
When you talk about being tired, I also think about when you discuss in that first chapter how Jesus was tempted as we were, but he was also tempted like no other. And in other words, you spoke about how he faced the full power of Satan. And we give in when he only gives a fraction of his power. But if we're tired, we're going to put up even less of a fight.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be even faster.
Everybody got a songbook? Pick the songbook. Anybody here have a problem picking up the songbook? No. Oftentimes, it's like that with temptation. We can withstand it at the very beginning. But then eventually what happens? We give in because it gets tougher. Did Jesus ever give in? No. If this was a temptation, he held on to this his entire life and never gave in to putting it down. How long do you think you could hold this book like this? This is a great illustration of what Jesus went through. versus what we go through. Yeah, I can withstand it for 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. Jesus was able to withstand temptation the entire time. Does that mean it was easy for him? No. The longer you don't give in, oftentimes the heavier the burden. Until, I guess, you could argue you start to build muscles and so on and so forth. But that would ruin the illustration now, wouldn't it? Yeah. Anybody remember who held up Moses' arms? Aaron and her. That's right. We don't know what her name was, but it was her. Look at page 14. So our base self comes out. We want to quit. Quitting is an idea of unbelief. If we look at chapter 3, verses 12 through 13, take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God, but encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So here is a time to get terrified, and that is of giving up. You look at chapter 4, verses 12 through 13. When I get tired, I can't hide. The word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, and piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, of both joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Again, be terrified of being found out, being an unbeliever in the Word of God is living instead of going to the throne of grace. Now, a lot of our religious friends believe that you can't fall from grace, but here are constant warnings against that. And so we've got this paradox within Hebrews of warnings against falling from grace, but confidence that you're going to make it. And that's a good balance for all of us to have. We should be warned that we can fall from grace, but we should have confidence that we can make it. And that's what he tries to build in them. He says, I know that you are going to be able to succeed. That's in chapter 6 after going through people falling from grace. When you look at page 15, we're getting into the meat of the chapter. Chapter, not chapter 4, but chapter 1 of the book. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. I was surprised that Hebrews is the only book to discuss the high priesthood of Jesus in the New Testament. Did y'all know that? I didn't until somebody told me. That's one of the reasons why Hebrews is such an essential book for us today. It's the only one in the New Testament. And when it talks about the high priesthood of Jesus, it goes back to what? Tabernacle, contrast to Aaron, and he is a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So we find it foreshadowed in the Old Testament, but it doesn't specifically mention Jesus. So Hebrews is the only place that gives us that picture. And our priest, it says in verse 15, you look on page 15, our priest sits on a throne. And I've been thinking about this a little bit more. And we know that he sits on a throne because of Hebrews chapter 1. And I was in discussion with somebody about whether the throne of grace is Jesus' throne or is the Father's throne. And this is a conclusion I've come to in the last 10 minutes. I've been thinking on this for several days. Should be really good. Okay, we know that there is a throne of Jesus, Hebrews chapter 1. We also know that Jesus sits at the right hand of God, the Father, so the Father's on the throne. In this picture here, the throne of grace is reworded from the seat of mercy in the most holy place. So this is what I'm thinking, that the throne is not Jesus' throne, it's the Father's throne. But Jesus is the throne upon which he sits. In this picture, in the Holy of Holies, you have the mercy seat, right? Was the mercy seat the Father? Was the mercy seat God? No. Was the mercy seat the place that you met God? Yes. So this is the idea that I'm thinking as I'm trying to put all of this together still, even though I wrote this book many years ago. The throne of grace is we approach the Father who is sitting on his throne, but Jesus is the one through whom we approach him. In that sense, just like God was not the mercy seat, but the place you met God, the Father is not the throne of grace. Jesus is, but it's the Father's throne where we meet the Father. And I think that might be a good way of looking at how the throne of grace is the mercy seat, but the throne is not God himself. It is the place that we approach God, and that's Jesus. Any thoughts on that? Mm-hmm. I think an argument could be made within Hebrews in this sense that the recipients of Hebrews had a good understanding of what the tabernacle and temple was, though. That the mercy seat was where God met them, but the mercy seat was not God. And in that sense, Romans and Hebrews can harmonize with one another. So I believe that Jesus is passing through the created heavens, and that is one curtain. Hebrews 10 refers to the curtain as being his what? Jesus' flesh. And we shouldn't be surprised that there's more than one way to picture it as you look at the tabernacle, which we did Wednesday night. It's a picture of the world, the church, and then the presence of God in the Holy of Holies. But it's also a picture of, you got the first heaven, which is the earth and the sky. You got the second heaven, which is what? What's the second heaven? It's the universe. What's the third heaven? This place, the throne of God, where God is. It's not learned here in Hebrews, it's learned in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So Jesus is passing through. And if I'm correct that this is Jesus literally passing through the heavens themselves and it being pictured as the tabernacle, what aspect of Jesus' earthly ministry does this cover? It's not his birth. It's not his death. It's not really his resurrection. There's one other aspect of Jesus, his ascension. Yeah, and he's where he's ruling and reigning, but he ascends. And in Hebrews, we've got allusion to Jesus' death, his resurrection. Let me go back to his life, his temptation, his death, his resurrection, and this is teaching his ascension. Now we are to hold fast. The word hold fast has the idea of reverential holding fast, being close to. Y'all ever go on those carnival rides? I used to. I refuse to go on a carnival ride anymore. It's because of a really bad experience. When Rachel was real little, we went on one of those carnival rides that goes around like this, and your little cart, turns. And, I buckled my seatbelt, and she said, well, my seatbelt's not buckled. I said, don't worry, honey, they're going to come by and they're going to check. Now, I should have unbuckled mine and checked hers. But I had confidence, wrongly so, in the guy that was running the thing. And he didn't check, and all of a sudden it started. And we're going like this. And the cart's turning like this. And she's, the forces of gravity are sending her back and forth. And I'm having to, because I can't take off my own seatbelt, lean towards her like that, brace my knee against the wall of the cart as we're going around. And I'm hollering, stop! Seatbelt! Broken! Stop! Again and again and again. Finally, he heard me. And we got off. I could barely walk. I had bruises on my knees because I was doing what? Holding fast. Why was I holding fast so tenaciously? Yeah, I loved her. Life was at stake, right? Well, why should we hold fast tenaciously, spiritually? Life is at stake. Eternal life. What do you think this confession of ours is that we are to hold fast to? Everything is about Jesus is the one to whom is a fulfillment of how to ultimately approach God. And so we have our faith in Him. That's the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament shows that the way to approach God is ultimately through Jesus Christ. So we have our great high priest. He's passed through the heavens, the ascension. Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession that we believe Jesus is the Son of God. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who's been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. When it says we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who's been tempted in every way as we are, does that mean that Jesus Christ went through every specific type of temptation that everybody goes through? Yeah, I think it's more categories than anything. I mean, I have heard people abuse this passage, saying that every temptation, the most base, gross one that you can think of, oh, Jesus went through that too. Because he went through every temptation. That's not what this is teaching. This is teaching Jesus knows what it's like to live as a human being. Gordon.
Unique, that would imply that every temptation is unique, correct?
It is. There's generally three categories that people put, because John did, temptation in. And that's not in the book of Hebrews, but I think that's really what it is talking about. What is the point of saying that we have a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses? What's the point of that? Okay. We're not the only one, Frank. Yep. Gordon?
And he has the knowledge of what it's like to live as a man.
Cindy?
So your question was, repeat your question again before I answer it.
Well, that's assuming I can repeat it like I said it. Why is it important for us to know that we have a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses?
Putting it on, for me, putting it on a human perspective. If I'm dealing with something and someone comes to me and says, I know what you're going through. I went through the exact same thing, and this is what helped me. It makes it, you feel like somebody understands.
Yeah.
And knowing that he has gone through what we've gone through, and I'm not sure he was always tempted those 3 times in the desert,
Well, we know it wasn't.
but
Yeah.
knowing that he walked in human form should give us comfort that when we talk to him, he's not coming from a judgmental state, just like that person that I talked about my issue, and they had the same one. It gives you a whole different feeling than if you go to the person that you perceive as perfect and don't feel like they've ever been through anything, and they're telling you what you need to do. That just leaves you like, yeah, well, you've never been there. You don't know what you're talking about.
Even though everything they say may be valid.
It doesn't feel valid when they do not have that issue. For me, that's the comfort in that passage.
Did you have any raised?
Looking at me,
Yes.
I did, and she just said it. I'm thinking of the understanding, and he's been through what we went through. It wasn't somebody that was just sitting there in judgment and saying you shouldn't have done this. He has the understanding and mercy.
Do you think that there is also a contrast between Jesus here and the Israelites who did not enter into the rest because of unbelief in the wilderness? Because that's what leads up to this idea, the Sabbath rest. They failed through their temptations. What are some of the temptations in the wilderness? No water. No food. Basic so. Yes, Alan.
Way before when I read this passage, I thought of 1 John 2, the temptation in the wilderness, Eve's temptation, 3. But at the beginning of the study, you urged us to read this, hearing it as the original readers would have heard it. And the insight we get from the book of Hebrews in terms of their temptation, yes, in chapter 13, immorality is mentioned. Married pet is undefiled. Adulterers he'll judge. That kind of temptation is mentioned, but most of what's discussed is the temptation to give up in the midst of persecution and suffering and trial. The temptation to cease being diligent and become lazy.
I think that's the reason why it's probably imperative to see this connected to the one of the connections we're supposed to make in chapter 4 is Jesus went into his rest, which was when he passed through the heavens to the right hand of God. The Israelites did not go into their rest because of their unbelief, and they gave up when they were supposed to go into the land of Canaan. Go ahead.
The point in chapter 4 is even those who went into the land of Canaan didn't actually receive the rest that God ultimately had in view.
This is the second point, yes. The first one is some did not go in because their faith was not mixed with belief, how does it say it?
Yeah, it's different in different verses.
It is.
With the faith of others,
Yeah.
or their actions were joined with faith.
Yeah. And so just like Canaan, in this sense, is like the tabernacle. It's a shadow of what is to come. The tabernacle was not truly the presence of God in the sense that eternity will be. And they went into the land of Canaan, but it was not the pure rest that we're supposed to find in Jesus Christ. So you got, I think, several layers. The wilderness, that's Jesus' life. Israelites, some died in the wilderness because they gave up. Some went in to the land of Canaan. But that still wasn't the true fulfillment. The tabernacle was not the true fulfillment. It's just a shadow of the rest to come. When Jesus went into and this is actually later on in Hebrews chapter 10, when Jesus went into the Holy of Holies, what does it say he did? Which was unlike any high priest who went into the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. Anybody remember? He sat down. That's rest. That is significant. So Jesus goes into his rest when he goes into the Holy of Holies. They did not go into their rest, which was land of Canaan. They did go to the rest, but it wasn't the true rest. Jesus is the true rest. Anybody else? Probably. There's if you go to another theme in the New Testament, now but not yet, that would be the kingdom. We're in the kingdom now, but we're not in the kingdom in its fullness. We have rest. We have rest in Jesus now, but we don't have yet our full rest, which will only come when the struggles of this life are over. Mark?
People did
Good. I did my job.
about Jesus being at rest because he still has more to do when he turns us back over to the Father. So he still, I'm sure, he knew what was going on with the people of the old system as well as what's coming in the new system. And yet he's gone back and ascended to the Father, but yet he's reigning on his throne. And I've never seen a king reign on his throne be at rest.
Alan?
Probably in chapter 10, 9 and 10, the sat down and the rest aspect is more in contrast to the Jewish priests. They're standing at the altar offering sacrifices. Jesus has sat down because he's offered a perfect sacrifice that doesn't end.
That's true. I wish I remember where it was. It's in one of the Psalms. Maybe somebody remembers where. The throne itself is considered a place of rest. When we go back to Genesis, because I think that is the same picture. God was creating to have a relationship with his people. And even the earth itself, did you all notice the earth itself has 3 different sections?
The core, the mantle, and the breast.
No. You've got outside Eden, you got Eden, then you got the Garden of Eden. He planted a garden in Eden. So even creation itself has that trifold section. Out of Eden, Eden, the Garden of Eden. And when God finished creating everything, what did it say he did? He rested. Does that mean he never did anything again? Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's also not only an active rest, it's a specific rest. Jesus is never going to, and this is in Hebrews 9, Jesus is never again going to offer a sacrifice for sins. He's rested from that particular work. Thank you. Psalm 132. The throne of God is considered a resting place. Now, we are trying to spend only 2 weeks per lesson. And we didn't get over the questions, but you have the book, you have the material. This is the material for next next Sunday. I have an assignment for you. And it is this. Before you read my material, I want you to read 2 Corinthians 11 and 12. And I want you to see if you can figure out what the thorn in Paul's flesh is. The reason why is there are a few people, and I'm one of them, that believes that Paul tells you what the thorn of the flesh is. And the only reason why we think that we don't know is because we keep being told you can't know. So read 2 Corinthians 11 and 12 to see if Paul tells you what the thorn in the flesh is. And so we'll do chapter 2 next week. I really meant to get over the questions, but we had a lot of good discussions. But I do hope that you will use the material and answer the questions as a review for yourself. And Wednesday night, Chris, have you decided what we're doing Wednesday night yet? I think that's enough. He and I have already been talking about it, just haven't concluded. Yes, Gordon.
Can you, this section in 1 where you talk about the omniscience of God and God the Father, his knowledge from creation, Jesus' knowledge from living as a man.
Yeah, you notice I didn't cover that in class. The reason why I didn't cover that in class is that's the side of me that I really enjoy that a lot of people don't, is some knowledge only learned by experience. And that's why Jesus had to become a human being, so that he could be tempted in all things like we are, so he could sympathize with us, because uncreated deity, because they haven't experienced it. Frank.
No, I'm reflecting on what you said early in the class